Thanks for inviting me along here to speak about this work that we've been doing for the past year and a half. It's been a bit of an epic undertaking. As you can see, there's been quite a few people involved in it, and we've actually only really sort of just finished the piece of work very, very recently. So basically I'm going to be talking about how physiological development shapes behaviour in adolescence. So how the body changes in adolescence and what kind of impact that might have on behaviour. So the two main reviewers who worked on this are Jan Pringle and Catherine Mills. Unfortunately, neither of them are here today, so I'm going to do my best to hopefully do justice to their work. And I should say this was a collaborative effort between ourselves at the Scottish Collaboration, NHS Health Scotland and the Institute for Cognitive Neuroscience at University College London. So I thought a good place to start would just be by just telling you a little bit about us, Scottish Collaboration for Public Health Research and Policy. We've got a really horrible acronym, SCPHRP. But basically, we are based in the Centre for Population Health Science at the University of Edinburgh, and we are part funded by the Medical Research Council and the Scottish Government's Chief Scientist Office. And one of our sort of key roles really is to work closely with policymakers and practitioners to try and understand the public health issues facing the Scottish public today, and also to try and identify and develop solutions to some of these public health problems. So currently we're split into 4 working groups, and these are go across the life course. So we have an early years working group, a midlife working group, and a later life working group. But the one I'm going to talk to you about today, the work I'm going to speak to you about today, fits into our adolescence working group. And I think, tying into what Naomi was saying, I think there has been a real emphasis on early years. And I think that, most of us, I don't think that there's anybody who would disagree that early years are an important period of life. But I think to some extent this increased focus on early years has been a little bit to the detriment of adolescence, which is an equally very important stage in the life course. So just a few points. Adolescence is a unique period of life. It's characterised by the transition from childhood to adulthood. Most people tend to shed off their childhood roles and move on to more sort of mature roles, like taking up employment, becoming a parent, for example. There's increased opportunity during this period to engage in health-harming and health-enhancing behaviours. So there's much more exposure at that point of the life course to, say, for example, alcohol, substances, sexual behaviours, etc. And during that period, there's a number of influences which emerge and are fairly dominant, such as social influences like peer pressure and the pressure to conform to group norms. So it's really important that we look at adolescence as a unique period in its own right, and that we don't sort of lose sight of it in amongst the focus upon early years. There's a fantastic opportunity during adolescence to try and foster positive outcomes for the immediate health of the adolescent, plus the sort of longer term outcomes as well. So a few years ago, myself and Ruth Jepson, my colleague, and some people at NHS Health Scotland, we got together and we had a chat about what do we need to, what are the gaps in terms of our understanding around adolescence. And one of the areas where we felt that there wasn't really much out there was in terms of the physiological development of the adolescent body and how that might impact upon health behaviour. So these images here just show you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about physiological systems. So things like the nervous system, which is all to do with your thinking, your emotions, skeletal system, which is your movement, and there's a digestive system and respiratory system up there. I don't know if you can see that image of the digestive system, but it's pretty graphic. There are other systems as well, which I couldn't find images for. But you also have your endocrine system, which is your which controls your hormones, and also the reproductive system as well. So adolescence is a time when there is a great deal of changes physiologically. And I think, again, just to go back to early years, there's often a lot of emphasis put on early years as being a period where there's a lot of physiological development that has an impact further down the line. We would argue that adolescence is almost like a second sort of period of rapid growth, which we really need to pay attention to. And I think having some understanding of this and how it can affect behaviour can really help us to identify ways to support our young people. So anyway, we kind of decided we need to have a review and look at the literature in this area, pull it together. We suspected that quite a lot of the material here would be related to brain physiology. So our group at this point, we're basically public health researchers, so we were missing the sort of neuroscience expertise. So we managed to get on board Catherine Mills and Sarah Jane Blakemore, who are based at UCL in London, who acted really as our sort of neuroscience experts in this review. And if anybody's interested, Sarah Jane, she's done an awful lot of really quite interesting videos that are available on YouTube around the topic of the brain during adolescence, and hopefully, potentially maybe after the event, we might be able to circulate some links to you with those as well. So as I said, during adolescence, we have these substantial physiological changes which occur, and the aim of our review is to try and gain an understanding of the relationship between these changes and health behaviours. So what I've done here is I've kind of presented selected findings. So I've picked out a few things that I personally find quite interesting, kind of hoping that you'll find them interesting as well. And if you're interested in the full report, it will be available soon on the NHS Health Scotland website. And by soon, I mean hopefully within the next few months. So this is maybe the boring part. Essentially, this was a review method. We conducted a systematic review, which is basically a very thorough type of review that collects and critically looks at various studies. We were interested in theories or hypotheses that were describing bodily changes during adolescence and how those might affect health behaviour in particular. And the type of behaviours we were looking at were behaviours such as diet, nutrition, physical activity, substance use, smoking, sexual behaviours, and sleep. These are kind of like the big health behaviours. If anybody's interested or needs sort of bedtime reading material, this is the paper that we published on the method. It's a bit dry, but if anybody wants to know a bit more about our method for searching, you can access that. So on to the findings. In total, we identified 341 papers. The bulk of these were related to, as we suspected, were related to brain physiology. So 181 papers were related to that area. And 160 papers were related to other aspects of physiological development, like the endocrine or musculoskeletal systems. So the remainder of this talk, as I said, I'm just going to pick out a few findings that I found interesting, and hopefully we can have some discussion on them. So this first slide relates to the brain and risky decision making. Now, some of you might be aware of a general perception that's certainly been in the popular media that adolescents are more prone to sort of taking riskier decisions. So we kind of wanted to look at that, and we were able to look at that and try and identify whether that is actually the case. So what is decision making? Well, basically decision making is thinking. It's a rational process where you are weighing up options and then you decide on a particular outcome. So say, for example, you're in McDonald's and you're sort of deciding whether or not to have a large meal or a medium meal, or you're in Greg's and you're deciding on whether to buy a Yum Yum with your lunch, which I often do. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with decision making in this context here. And what we found was that there's no evidence to suggest that adolescents are more likely to choose the sort of riskier options in these type of instances, and that adolescence is really a time of differentiation in how an individual responds to risk. So it's basically like everybody else. You'll have some people who respond to risk differently than others. You'll have some people that choose the riskier option and some that don't. And it's much the same in adolescence, which is what we found, which challenges this idea of young people as being hardwired to engage in risky behaviours. And also that final point on the slide here, adolescents are less likely to select risky options when they've been given advice perceived to be expert. So again, it's kind of like the rest of us, really, very much process and make decisions like the rest of us. We take on board what people say, and then we make our decision. But what about in instances where emotions are high? So instances where a young person gets caught up in the moment, so they might be out with friends, they may be drinking, they might be in the context of a romantic relationship, and there's decisions being made about sexual behaviour. What about these situations where emotion is fairly high? And what we found in 4 studies, and it is only 4 studies, so it's a small number of studies, is that the underpinnings of emotion regulations they continue to mature through adolescence. So what this means is that adolescents might respond faster and with less inhibition when situations are highly emotionally charged. So the brain almost becomes overwhelmed by the emotions that it's unable to kind of put in place the sort of rational decision-making side of things. And I think that's really interesting. It has implications for, again, the type of issues that Naomi was talking about. During adolescence, you may have divorce, you may have other situations such as death or whatnot. In these situations where there is high emotion, you would expect that adolescents would need more support, really, to be able to try and manage their behaviours, particularly in light of the finding that in these type of situations it's much more difficult for adolescents to control their behaviour due to their brain physiology. So sorry, I guess the answer to this issue about risky decision making is that on the whole, adolescents are there's no reason to suggest that they're more likely to choose the riskier option. But in situations where there's high emotions, then they need a bit of extra support there. I think we can all relate to this first point here, that sleep has consequences for psychological and physical health. It's such an important thing that we get enough sleep. This review has caused a lot of sleepless nights for many people. What we've found in terms of adolescence is that generally adolescents, there comes a point where puberty, the onset of puberty, where adolescents need to sleep for longer periods. And I think this has very interesting implications for things like the structure of the school day. So what these studies suggest is that potentially we should be thinking about things like how can we restructure our school day? Should we be starting school later to incorporate these type of biological changes? And this is a universal thing across most mammals, most adolescent mammals. When they reach pubertal onset, they require longer sort of time asleep. So what we generally find is that because of the school hours, adolescents are sort of quite commonly sleep deprived. Then you throw in things like sort of Facebook and sort of mobile phones and whatnot, then it's kind of a bit of a bad mixture in terms of sleep. And then finally, I just thought I'd say a little bit about brain structure and substance use. And what we found here was 12 studies which suggested that exposure to substances can really affect the white matter development in the brain. The white matter, in this case, refers to the white matter in the frontal lobe, which is all to do with your cognitive processes, your thinking, your memory, and your attention. And what these studies suggest is that adolescents exposed to substances tend to have poorer sort of things like cognitive function, working memory, attention, etc. I think, realistically, most people, and I'm sure most people in this room, when we were teenagers, we all sort of dabble in these type of things. But I think we really need to kind of keep an eye out for situations where somebody may be sort of going down like a route where there's overuse. Because it looks as if it can have a very detrimental effect on cognitive function, which would have consequences further down the line as well. And this final point is basically just that some individuals can show markers of vulnerability in the brain. So you can see by looking at MRI scans that the brain structure changes in response to substances. So I think, it emphasises the need for interventions in this particular area. And I know we are already doing quite a lot in that area. So just some points to consider. Most of the material related to brain physiology, which I think is where the majority of the theory and evidence lies. So I think, it's worth pointing out that there is stuff out there on the endocrine system and whatnot, but most of it is related to brain physiology. Probably not surprising considering the brain has such a prominent role in behaviour. But I think, as a cautionary note, it is worth noting that most of these studies were conducted in laboratory settings, partly because it's quite difficult to measure people's brain function in a sort of real-world setting. But I think we need to keep that in mind, that the type of environment that you get in the laboratory is very different from the environments that our young people grow up in and the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. So in a way, I think that there's much still to learn around brain function. I think we're really only at the start of understanding these things, and certainly the neuroscientists who are involved here, they agreed that this is a very young science currently. So just to conclude, our findings support calls for greater focus upon adolescent development as a unique period in its own right. There's a number of physiological changes that are occurring during that period that really we should be sitting up and paying more attention to. This period is a critical opportunity to support healthy, positive change in ways that might offset trajectories into health and poverty. So I think what we've identified is a useful synthesis of information which can hopefully, we're aiming for it to be useful for everybody who's working with young people. So we're going to be publishing the findings in a variety of different formats. Just to finish up, do I have enough time to...
Yep, you've got a couple more minutes.
Just to finish up, I just thought I'd give you a little bit more information about our working groups. Basically, the working groups are a network of interested parties from third sector, policy and academia. We're always looking for new members. It's a great kind of networking opportunity. If anybody's interested in joining a working group and wants to know a bit more about what it would involve, please do get in touch, either with myself or with these folk on the slides here, on the slide here. We do have a development awards scheme, which is a grant scheme for members of the working group. So say you joined the adolescent group and you wanted to attend a conference, then we have money that might help you to do that. And also, if you're looking for more information, we're on Twitter and YouTube as well, and we're quite vocal on Twitter. So thanks very much. This work, I should say, was funded jointly by Health Scotland and ourselves at the collaboration. And just like to thank John Coleman, Annalise Goddard and Divya Jindal-Snape for their advice as part of the advisory group. So thank you very much.